So Tim, we've been out filming today, actually, a feature that we're going to be having on our next episode, but something we've been chatting about a little bit today is the tidal coefficients. They're not something I've ever really looked at properly before, but I know it's something that you base a lot of your own fishing on. So can you tell us a little bit about it and why you use it and how you use it?
Yeah, sure. So tidal coefficient is just a way to express the size of the tide in a way that's true for everywhere in the country. So often if you're looking at a tide table, you'll see that there's a kind of, you'll have the highest height and the lowest height, and you'll guess how big the tide is based on that. So spring tide, you'll know it's that many meters up and down. Tidal coefficient is a single number, ranges from about 30 to about 120, and that's just a value that tells you, based on the moon, how big the tide is going to be on that day. And so what that allows you to do is a couple of things. One is, if you've got lots of marks across different areas, you'll know that the tide heights are going to be different for all of those, but this will tell you the kind of force on the tide across all of them. So it's really helpful for kind of building up a picture of how fish behave across all of your marks.
Okay.
And also maybe when you're deciding where to select on a given day.
So is it almost like, not exactly, I'm sure, but it's almost like an average then, perhaps, in terms of, like you say, you've got your minimum and your maximum normally. It's not, I know it's not an average number between those two things, but is it some way related to some sort of average?
Yeah, I must admit, I can't rattle this off, but it's to do with the distance between the very lowest tide and the very highest tide across the datum. So
across the course of a whole year, for example? Or?
Yeah, so you'll see that as you track through the year, you'll see that around the vernal and autumnal equinox, where you get the biggest tides of the year, you'll see that the numbers, that's when you'll see the 120 turn up on the scale.
Yeah, gotcha.
Or 115 or whatever.
Yeah,
so that's another thing it does. It's not that it's telling you anything that you don't get from your tide book for that location, but it's the fact that it's sort of condensing it into a really easy to think about number.
Yeah, rather than being very localized. Yeah.
And that allows you to really kind of just get a kind of sensation for what size a tide is going to be. And then when you move to another mark, you don't have to kind of relearn all that based on a different datum. And obviously also it kind of helps deal with that thing that if you're going through the sizes of tides, sometimes that can be a bit misleading. The heights of the tides that you see in your book they're calculated based on the way the moon behaves, and to a certain lesser extent the sun, but they actually get modified by pressure, by wind, all sorts of things. So actually height in meters isn't really telling you anything extra in a way.
I think I did read a number of years ago about the sort of let's say a spring low might affect the water depth or difference between what is stated on your chart and what you actually see by sort of 10 or 20 centimeters even.
That's right, yeah. And if the pressure is especially high,
sorry, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So the air pressure will push the tide down. That's what I remember.
Yeah,
I think that makes sense. And then the other thing is, obviously, if you've got a wind behind the tide, particularly if you're up an estuary, and actually change the tide height quite a bit.
I mean, where do you find where do you find these numbers? Where are the tidal coefficients?
So a lot of different websites that give out tide information will have it. I use one called Tides for Fishing, which I think a lot of people use, and that quotes tide coefficients. Funnily enough, I've got my own sort of fish logging program that I've written, which is based on lots of public APIs, and that does it as well. Yeah. But also, I think a lot of tide sites have it. So
okay, cool. Well, I'll have to start looking at it a little bit more. Like I say, I've sort of been maybe a little bit sort of just oblivious to a certain extent. So no, it's interesting. I'll have a look at it, and hopefully other people can maybe make some use of it as well.
Yeah, hopefully so.